What would make a trained assassin betray her country? In the heart of West Africa, an American spy named Natasha was confronted with this impossible choice after experiencing unexpected kindness from her target. President Ibrahim Traore, the man she was sent to kill, found her homeless on the streets and offered her shelter when no one else would. As she infiltrated his inner circle, what she discovered about him and his country would change everything. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. With seasoned assurance, Natasha Reeves arrived in Ouagadougou. She was recognized as a Canadian humanitarian worker with a focus on agricultural development by her fictitious passport. When she handed over her visa with a practiced smile, the falsified documents were intact at customs. She represented Green Harvest Solutions, a small non-governmental organization that promotes sustainable farming methods in West Africa. Thus, her cover story was flawless. Nobody realized that years of specialized training were hidden under her sincere manner and well-chosen clothing of decent hiking boots and khakis. She was chosen for this mission by the agency because of her history of conducting effective operations in Niger and Mali. She had received a clear briefing: infiltrate, evaluate, and remove President Ibrahim Traoré, whose rising popularity and anti-Western beliefs endangered U.S. interests in the area. Natasha's strategy appeared simple. She would make a name for herself in the humanitarian world, progressively gain access to government representatives, and eventually get an invitation to a presidential function. She would then use one of the various assassination techniques she had been taught to use. Only brief contact with the target's skin was necessary for the toxin concealed in her necklace pendant to work. Her plan depended on a local contact, Marcel, a dissatisfied former government worker who had consented to help arrange introductions to important people. 3 days following her arrival, they met at a modest cafe where Marcel reassured her that everything was going according to plan. He promised to return the next day with the necessary paperwork and login credentials after collecting a substantial sum. Natasha waited for hours at the agreed-upon meeting place the following morning. Marcel never showed up. Police officers had asked about her. The desk receptionist told her when she got back to her hotel. Someone had searched her room. She had lost her backup paperwork, communication devices, and emergency cash. By stealing her resources and revealing her cover, Marcel had deceived her. Despite the urgent evacuation required by protocol, her emergency communication channels were not responded. She had been disavowed by the agency. She would later find out that her objective had become inconvenient due to a political change back in Washington. With a failed cover and dwindling choices, she was suddenly a burden, left behind in a foreign nation. Natasha's condition rapidly worsened in a matter of days. She only had enough money for a week's worth of increasingly subpar lodgings before she ended up sleeping in an abandoned building outside of Ouagadougou. She was ready for torture, a chase, and battle thanks to her training, but she had not been prepared for homelessness in a city where she was a stranger with no one to turn to for help. She made ends meet by gathering trash plastic bottles to sell and scrounging food. Her skin became burnt, her clothes became filthy, and her cheeks became hollow. People consciously avoided staring at her as a result of the shift, which offered a new form of concealment. This type of invisibility, not camouflage but social erasure, was not something her training in blending in had foreseen. She was huddled behind a wall in the central market area during the third week, seeing people going about their everyday lives with houses and purpose. Her current state of desperation was a sharp contrast to her previous confidence. Her agency instructors had never discussed what to do in the event that the entire mission infrastructure failed. Their paths crossed during one of President Traoré's spontaneous local visits. These spontaneous interactions with civilians had earned the young president a reputation that security experts viewed as risky, but that had won him over the populace. Natasha was so preoccupied with her immediate survival demands that she hardly noticed the oncoming motorcade. The unkempt foreign woman caught President Traoré's attention as he strolled among market merchants and chatted with locals. He saw something about her discouraged demeanor. He went straight to her in spite of his security detail's objections. He said, "You are far from home," in French, but when he recognized her gaze, he changed to English. "Are you in need of assistance?" Looking up at the man she had been ordered to kill, Natasha gazed. His face was not one of mistrust, but of real worry. According to her training, she should see this as an unanticipated chance to finish her objective. Rather, she was confused by his humanity and ashamed of her current situation. Because she was a foreign national with no apparent reason to be there, the president's security team decided to hold her for interrogation. Traoré, however, disregarded them. He gave the order: arrange shelter and medical attention. This woman needs help, not interrogation. The first fracture in Natasha's professional facade was caused by that small gesture of kindness. In order to prepare for her job, she had thoroughly researched Traoré and committed his routine, habits, and security flaws to memory. He had been described as a dangerous radical and a menace to stability in the briefing papers. There had been nothing to prepare her for the truth of his straightforward generosity. Natasha hesitated when she was offered a ride to a government guest facility. Every training principle was broken when she accepted assistance from her goal. However, continuing to live in desperation on the streets was the alternative. Acutely conscious of the irony, she reluctantly, out of need, let herself be led into a car. Her attempt to approach the president had been successful, but it had done so in a way she had not expected. Not by devious manipulation, but by his unanticipated kindness. The first purpose of Natasha's visit to the presidential residence was surveillance. She was assigned a small room in a guest building next to the main house, where she could see the arrivals and departures of security guards and employees. During her initial days, she mapped entry locations, documented security rotations, and identified potential vulnerabilities in the presidential protection systems, despite being officially a guest receiving humanitarian help. Even when she was being treated for malnutrition and regained her strength, her training began on autopilot. She received surprising warmth from the facility workers. They gave her regular meals and clean clothes, and they gradually extended an invitation for her to join in group activities. While keeping up her cover story, Natasha collected intelligence through these exchanges. Though she pointed out that security was still on guard despite the laid-back vibe, every discussion was a chance to find out more about getting access to the president. President Traoré kept an unexpected schedule. He worked through breakfast talks with advisors and ministers after waking up early for basic morning drills with his security staff. Natasha was really impressed by his approachability. In contrast to other heads of state she had researched, Traoré frequently hosted open forums where people could voice their concerns to him directly. He sat quietly during these meetings, paying close attention to the community elders, farmers, and teachers. Traoré has been presented as a dangerous extremist with escalating anti-Western sentiment in her agency briefings. They characterized him as cunning, consolidating power through populist rhetoric. Every day, however, Natasha saw facts that went against this story. The president frequently wore the same basic military uniform and led a modest life. He demanded that government funds be allocated to public initiatives rather than official luxury and ate the same regional cuisine as his employees. Natasha saw Traoré talking with local students one evening. He discussed their suggestions for bettering the country while sitting cross-legged in a circle with them rather than giving a formal speech. "Our freedom must include economic sovereignty," he informed them. The pupils nodded in agreement, their faces displaying true respect rather than fear. Foreign aid with conditions is just colonialism wearing a new mask. Natasha discovered a means to gain access to an encrypted communication channel during her third week at the compound. Her handlers reacted impatiently at once. The message implied that the agency would send someone who could finish her mission if she couldn't, so removing her as a burden. Mission timeline has been compromised. Execute priority objective within 72 hours or extraction team will be deployed. President Traoré invited Natasha to supper with him that same evening. Such access would typically be prohibited by security protocols, but the president had taken an odd interest in the foreign woman he had saved. Natasha saw her mission's ideal moment to be fulfilled. Her necklace pendant still contained the venom. It would only take a brush across his hand. Over rice and grilled fish, Traoré talked about his upbringing in a small rural hamlet. his military education, and his grudging foray into politics when the corruption of the previous administration became intolerable. "I never wanted to be president," he acknowledged in confession. "I wanted to be a mathematics teacher. But when you see your people suffering while foreign companies extract our wealth, someone must stand." He outlined his vision for Burkina Faso, which includes armed units trained to protect national resources rather than corporate assets, healthcare systems free from foreign pharmaceutical interests, and educational institutions not reliant on foreign curricula. "The greatest threat to African sovereignty isn't terrorism," he said. "It's the economic warfare waged through unbalanced trade agreements and conditional loans." Several times during their chat, Natasha's hand went to her necklace, but she paused each time. The president's remarks were in line with analyses she had read in confidential papers that openly addressed U.S. goals in retaining economic clout over resource-rich African countries. With his eyes directly meeting hers, Traoré questioned abruptly, "Do you know why your country abandoned you here?" She froze at the question. Before she could reply, he went on, "Because policies changed. Perhaps a new administration, new priorities. Individual agents become expendable when strategies shift. I've seen this pattern with French and American operations across West Africa." Although she was prepared for many situations by her training, she was not prepared for a target who was more knowledgeable about the political machinery underlying her mission than she was. Natasha realized that Traoré knew, or had a strong suspicion of, her genuine motivation when he discussed foreign intelligence operations in the area. He had nevertheless assisted her, continued to eat with her, still showed her respect. Natasha studied the confidential background information in her memory that night, defying her manager's 72-hour deadline. All of the arguments used to justify Traoré's removal focused on his opposition to foreign economic dominance of Burkina Faso's resources. The agency's real client was corporate interests endangered by resource nationalism, not the American people. Her encrypted channel reactivated the following morning. Her hunch that another agent was coming to finish what she hadn't was reinforced by the message, "Asset Kingfisher has been deployed to your location. Maintain position and provide support as needed." She was no longer trusted by the agency to carry out the assignment. She had to make a decision that would define not just her purpose, but also her humanity as her time was running short. 3 days after getting the coded message, Natasha saw Derek Lane at the market. She recognized him right away since 4 years prior. They had trained together at the agency's base in Virginia. Derek was an expert in technical assassinations, favoring electronic disturbances and remote triggers over direct physical touch. Her concerns were validated by his appearance in Ouagadougou. For efficiency, the agency had given up on nuance. She kept a close eye on him, being cautious not to be seen. Derek spent his first day setting up observation sites around the perimeter after checking into a modest hotel close to the presidential palace. Natasha watched him take a deliberate approach, using the same strategies they had both studied to attack her and President Traoré. Through the hotel's unprotected network, Natasha was able to access Derek's electronic trail that evening. Compared to her mission brief, his was more aggressive. Derek's orders prioritized completion over nuance, even though she had been told to make the assassination seem natural. He had 2 days to act during the president's next village outreach program in Koudougou, so time was of the essence. Natasha was forced to face her conflicting allegiances after the revelation. She had been trained to help Derek and finish the assignment. Defection meant lifelong exile, a life of watching over her shoulder, the logical portion of her mind told her. However, the disparity between her briefing materials and reality had become apparent in recent weeks. The dangerous extremist she had been ordered to remove was not President Traoré. He stood for African leadership that opposed outside control of its resources, which was something her managers were more afraid of. Natasha discovered that she was perched on a moral cliff. She had to assassinate a man who was trying to liberate his people from economic injustice in order to fulfill her purpose. She had to give up all she had held about her role as an agent in order to protect him. She would not be the tool of neo-colonial interests masquerading as national security. The conclusion became clear in a flash. Natasha had made up her mind and needed facts. She was familiar enough with Derek's techniques to predict his strategy. Multiple assault routes would be available at the village meeting, crowds for concealment, open areas for drone deployment, and inadequate security infrastructure. Derek would choose denial and distance. She looked over Kudugu's satellite images to determine the best locations for placing remote weapons. There was a lot of humidity in the air on the day of the village meeting. Despite the hazards, President Traoré remained committed to accessibility by traveling with a small security staff. As a foreign visitor researching agricultural projects, Natasha traveled with the delegation. Derek stood close to the water tower that overlooked the gathering area, but she was still able to see him. Natasha saw Derek taking what looked like a remote control out of his luggage as Traoré started talking to the village elders. With trained accuracy, his fingertips swept over its surface. She followed his line of sight and noticed a small contraption on a nearby roof, perhaps a modified drone that could carry a deadly payload. Natasha made her way through the crowd to Derek's place without hesitation. She moved at a leisurely rate so as not to attract notice, bringing herself closer as Derek pressed the button. She quickly knocked the controller out of his hands and struck him precisely in the throat, rendering him momentarily immobile. She yelled, "Security breach! Drone attack!" and gestured to the gadget that was now flying close to the president. The presidential guards instantly surrounded Traoré in a protective circle and used signal jammers to target the drone. After a speedy recovery, Derek tried to get away, but Natasha followed him through the village streets. Her warning prompted local security authorities to intercept and imprison him, ending the pursuit. President Traoré then asked Natasha to meet with him privately. His expression showed neither anger nor surprise when she revealed her original mission and identity. "I suspected as much from our first conversation," he said, "but I needed to understand why America wants me dead." "Your economic policies threaten Western interests," Natasha explained. "You've canceled unbalanced mining contracts, redirected resource profits to social programs, and sought partnerships with Russia and China. The agency views your resource nationalism as destabilizing to American influence in the region." Traoré nodded slowly. "Not destabilizing to Africa, destabilizing to those who have exploited Africa. That is the true reason." Derek's interrogation confirmed Natasha's explanation. The assassination order had originated after Traoré nationalized several foreign-owned gold mines and redirected profits to local development. His growing popularity made him impossible to remove politically, so elimination became the preferred solution. "What happens to you now?" Traoré asked Natasha. "Your government will disavow you. You've become a liability to them." "I made my choice," she replied. "I can't return to my old life." "Then perhaps you could build a new one here," Traoré suggested. "Burkina Faso needs allies who understand how these systems work against us. Your knowledge could help protect our sovereignty." The president's offer represented something Natasha hadn't expected. Not just forgiveness, but purpose. In choosing to protect Traoré, she had inadvertently found her true mission. The skills she had developed to destabilize African nations could now be used to strengthen one. 3 years later, Natasha leads the Youth Peace Initiative in Ouagadougou, working with young Burkinabés to build technical skills and civic awareness. Her intelligence background now serves a different purpose, helping identify and counter foreign interference in Burkina Faso's development. President Traoré's decision to show compassion rather than suspicion transformed both their lives. As he once told her, "You said something before that you were lied to. Then tell me." That simple invitation to truth became the foundation of her new life. In a world where African resources remain targets for exploitation, this unlikely alliance demonstrates how sovereignty can prevail when leadership values human dignity above geopolitical manipulation.